The Resident Evil series has manned many personas over the years. The roots of the series are in pure survival horror, the likes of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 7. Then there was the more action-based games, the likes of Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, and of course, whatever the hell Resident Evil 6 is. I've played every mainline game from 1 to Village, including all the remakes, and the most baffling game of the lot is Resident Evil 6. This game is generally seen as being the ugly duckling of the series, as there isn't any semblance of horror anywhere to be found. With the series fully abandoning its roots and comprehensively committing to being action-focused, it's often seen as the worst game in the series. But the question I want to answer is it really that bad? For the structure of this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the game as a whole, before moving into each of the 4 campaigns individually, as I feel that that's the best way to discuss a game structured this way. So let's start. My general hypothesis for Resident Evil 6 is that I actually think it is a good game. I just think it's a bad Resident Evil game. You remember how Resident Evil 4 was action horror? Then Resident Evil 5 was just action? Well, Resident Evil 6 says, screw this, let's bump up the action to 10 in every single department. There are virtually 0 puzzles in this game. There aren't any creepy moments. This is an action game. This was also the first mainline game to allow you to move and shoot at the same time. The previous tank controls are long gone, and it leads to some really fluid movement for the time, as the game released 11 years ago in 2012. You can even throw yourself onto the ground if you want to. It can be useful, but it's mostly just to make the game seem more Hollywoody, which is a very prevalent design choice across the whole game. The set pieces in this game are just insane. Not necessarily insane good, but more insane what the hell is going on. Almost all of them are just there for the sake of being there, but that's what this game was going for. It's trying to be a dumb action game, which is fine. Dumb action games are fun, and they sell well. Despite being one of the lowest rated Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 6 is also one of the best selling Resident Evil games. There was a market for a game like this. I theorise it just hurt fans a little that a Resident Evil game had to be one of those games. The game also boasts quite a bit of enemy variety, something the series' next mainline entry would greatly fail with. This game is also immensely fun in co-op. This is a game that I feel you just need to play with a friend, because you can laugh at all the ridiculousness. This isn't a game where the immersion elements take the forefront, so the best way to enhance the experience is to look at it through the video gamey lens, and there's no better way to play an all-out action game than with a friend. I feel like I've been quite kind to this game so far, so let's tear it down on its biggest weakness: the story. What the actual hell even is this? This is just a convoluted mess. I love what they were going for. 4 interconnected campaigns taking place at the same time, featuring most of your favourite Resident Evil characters. That could have been brilliant, and it probably should have been, but it just isn't. The whole premise of the game is dumb fun, and dumb fun doesn't work when you're simultaneously trying to tell a serious story. The best Resident Evil stories are the campy B-tier horror ones like 4, where it doesn't take itself too seriously. This game doesn't have that. The game just continually skips from theme to theme without having the tonal nuance required to commit to any of them in a meaningful capacity. Consequentially, any intended emotional punch just misses the mark completely. But we'll talk about that more when we get to Chris's campaign. The game also massively overstays its welcome. The game tells the same serious story in the same non-serious way for 20 hours, and it's just too much. It doesn't go anywhere new or evolve in any worthwhile way, it just keeps being dumb, and there's only so much dumb fun you can soak up before it becomes grating. Right, I've given you a general perspective of the game, so now let's go into the individual campaigns, starting with our blonde beauty Leon Kennedy. Leon's campaign is by far the strongest, and this is because it's the most direct. The story isn't overly complicated here. Leon has a simple goal of trying to take down Simmons. Something that definitely isn't simple by any means, but you know what I mean. His co-op partner Helena has her own stake in the game, and her character arc with her sister is one of the more interesting developments in the whole game. Leon's campaign also boasts a superb level of variety. You'll go to a lot of places during this chapter. Although Leon's final chapter is stunningly dreadful. It's just poorly designed boss after poorly designed boss, but for the most part, Leon's campaign is honestly pretty strong. Although the game is heavily criticised, I don't think there's much wrong with this campaign in particular. It's more the tone of it and everything that comes after. Everything about Chris's campaign was horrible. It just felt like a poorly paced third-person Call of Duty rip-off, which I don't think is something anybody really wants. If you've seen my Resident Evil 5 video, which you should, by the way, I've made videos on every game before 6, and will be making videos on every game afterwards, so make sure to check those out. Then you'll know that I'm not that big of a fan of Chris anyway. They touched upon doing something pretty cool here, but didn't execute it well enough. Chris suffering from survivor's guilt and PTSD is a pretty serious topic to base his motivations in the game around, and I would have commended them for this had they actually attempted to explore it properly, but they didn't. As I mentioned earlier, this theme is just skipped across shallowly instead of driving into the effects that these things can have on people's mental health. Obviously, a blockbuster action game isn't really the place to be discussing the taboos of mental health, so why bother putting it in the first place? It's yet another example of the game being too convoluted for its own good. Too many ideas and themes thrown at a wall, with none of them sticking. Chris and Pierce's relationship also wasn't developed anywhere near well enough for the emotional climax to hold any substantial weight, and it fell flat as a result. Bland is how I would best describe Jake's campaign. He's not an interesting enough character, and once again, they could have done something cool with this. This is the son of Albert Wesker, Resident Evil supervillain and attempted yet failed ruler of the world. He could have played a crucial role in this story. He could have been fantastic, but he's instead a boring character with flip-flopping motivations. How can you claim to be nothing like your father and constantly stress how much you don't support his actions and whatnot, and then pull out a gun on Chris when you find out he killed him? He tried to take over the world. Of course Chris killed him. This man punches boulders simply for existing. He's not going to let world domination slide. It's just a failed attempt at forcing tension. Also, it could have been cool to see Sherry again if she actually served a purpose in the game instead of just being along for the ride. Ada's campaign is the one that ties everything together and also epitomises this game's biggest failure. It's too complicated for its own good. An Ada Wong lookalike is running around being evil. That's such a cop-out revelation. Ada's role in this series has always been that femme fatale, is she good or evil debate. So when you play the entirety of the game under the assumption that she's the one doing these things, you're going to be thinking, why is Ada doing these things? And not, there's no way Ada would do any of these things. It must be a lookalike. It's a blatant misleading of the audience, and it makes for poor storytelling. I love Ada as a character in general, but I thought her role in this story was pretty unimpressive. So after all that praise and criticism, it's time to answer the question, is Resident Evil 6 really that bad? The answer is no. Resident Evil 6 isn't the worst thing to ever grace the planet. It's also not a bad video game. I would not hesitate to call it a good video game either. Why do you play video games? I'm going to assume the answer is something along the lines of, because they're fun. Well, that's exactly what Resident Evil 6 is. The criticism of this game is that it abandoned the survival horror roots that this series built its foundation upon. But that doesn't mean Resident Evil 6 is a bad game. It just means it's a bad Resident Evil game. Thank you for making it to the end of this surprisingly long video. Jesus, it's 10 minutes long now. most of my videos aren't 10 minutes long, most of them are less than 10 minutes long. So if you'd like to see those videos, then please check out some more, subscribe if you enjoy them, and if you enjoyed this particular video, then leaving a like on it would help me out greatly. But for now, that's all from me. Have a nice day, and goodbye.